everybody, Child here. So I was unpacking some papers, a large tub full of papers, and I found this. It is called The Island of Bookadise, and this is copyright 2002, but I believe I started writing it a year or two earlier than that. So we're talking about approximately 12-year-old child writing a story. I started reading it thinking, how bad could it have been? My sister and I were both on the floor crying. We were laughing so hard by the time I was done reading this. And I thought I would share it with you guys. Because, well, there's a reason. I'll talk to you about it at the end. But let's dive in, shall we? One piece of context. There may be a stylistic clash in this story, and part of that is because there was a 12-year-old me writing it. But my dad wanted to help me make it better. And he's a very good writer. But it's very obvious when it was not a 12-year-old writing something. Here we go. The Island of Bookadise, a Christian fable for children of all ages. I will explain that later too, but that doesn't come to the halfway mark. Tell me a story, spin me a yarn, shock me with a legend, scare me with an old wives' tale, weave me a cloth from fabric born of allegory or fable, whether it be myth or classic, comedy or tragedy, I've got a story to top them all. I was traveling on the wide, wide sea when I chanced upon an uncharted island. Distracted by this surprise landmass, I hit a reef and broke my rudder. I somehow guided my ship to shore, anchored, and got off. I knew I had to get out of there soon, for I had but $50 in my pocket. No crew, no baggage, a ship that you just managed to guide yourself to shore, and $50. No trade goods. Yeah, okay, I'm a 12-year-old. Have to remember I'm a 12-year-old. I politely asked a passerby what this place was called, hoping he spoke English. Why, this is fairy tale land on the island of Bookadise, of course. I stared in shock as he walked away. Not only had he spoken in perfect English, but I had seen actual words float out of his mouth. I was a little obsessed with a phantom toll booth. I strolled along and presently spotted an amusement park and decided to amuse myself while I was there. I paid the lady at the ticket booth $10 for admission. Note, I have $50 in my pocket and 10 of them I spend on an amusement park. Not food and water, ladies and gentlemen. Not transportation, not a phone call. An amusement park. She looked at Alexander Hamilton on the front of my bill, then looked at me as if I were from outer space. "Who is that?" she asked. "You are obviously new here," she said condescendingly. "Would you like to see who is on the front of our $10 bill?" Before I could answer, she showed me one of her tens. "Is that Jack climbing a beanstalk on the front? Question mark, question mark, question mark," I gasped. The lady grinned. "I see you know something of our celebrities. Yes, that's Jack, our island's treasurer and founding librarian. There was a scandal when money kept disappearing from the treasury, but in the end it didn't amount to a hill of beans. You want to play guess who wrote that part? Since you've definitely brought the wrong kind of cash, I'll trade you for some good Bookadise money. I just love collecting foreign currency." I gave her my entire $200. Wait a second. It says here that I had only $50 in my pocket. We multiplied our funds magically in our pocket on the way over. Okay, $200 it is. So, I gave her my entire $200 and she gladly made the exchange with me. I gave her the $10 admission fee and went inside. On the first ride I chose, I was seated and buckled into a roller coaster car by an attendant. I was off. The car entered an oval enclosed space. Suddenly, I shot out of the top to see a huge she-duck gazing half expectantly, half happily at me. Bass child, how about you tell me how I'm supposed to picture an expression on a duck's bill that is half happy and half expectant? Of course, I screamed at this abnormality. At least my dry humor is intact. Then I saw 5 yellow ducklings, each the size of a large dog. I looked back to see what appeared to be a huge nest full of broken eggshells where I had just been. Oh my goodness! I had just been hatched! The car's metal track seemed to lead toward a nearby pond, and that is where the huge she-duck pushed me. Into the water I went. I then heard the other ducklings speak. To my surprise, I understood them. How could I not, when I could see every word? "You're ugly, and we hate you," shouted the ducklings. They were yelling at me. "You are not our brother. If you were, you would be yellow like us, but instead you're all gray and ugly. Go away." I was horrified to see their beaks pecking the car in spite. Other fowls joined in this hate crime. Suddenly the tracks grabbed my car and sent it hurtling into the air. It was as if I was flying! Some time passed in the air. The car then stopped at a lake full of swans and landed. I knew they would probably peck me to death, but there was really no choice in where the ride led. Strangely, the birds didn't attack. Instead, they parted, allowing me to pass through. They started murmuring softly among themselves and casting odd glances at one another. I looked at the shore and saw animatronic children the size of small skyscrapers. One of them pointed to me and cried, "Look at that swan! He's the most beautiful creature I have ever seen!" I glanced around to make sure they weren't pointing to another swan. Sure enough, they were pointing to my car. Suddenly I was back where I started, being asked to unbuckle and get off for another passenger. I vacated, but on my way out of the ride I caught a glimpse of its name. The banner I saw stated, "The Ugly Duckling Ride. Keep your hands inside the car." I wanted to get back in line for this, but I knew I had much exploring to do before getting off this island. Oh boy. After that experience, I was pretty hungry, so I looked around in the amusement park for something to eat. The first place I stopped at was the Little Mermaid Seafood. I cautiously walked in and was met by a seal dressed in a tuxedo. He showed me a seat at a genuine coral table on genuine seashell seats. Say that 5 times fast. Yes, that's actually in there. In parentheses, no less. The menu was, interesting to say the least. It included chicken fried crab, flambéed flounder, creamed calamari, and sautéed seahorse side dishes. As I had just seen the Disney movie not 1 week ago, I knew it would be difficult to eat Sebastian, Flounder, and Ursula in one meal. I excused myself and left, looking around for something else. After a while, I saw a hot dog vendor. He looked strange. After all, your normal everyday hot dog vendor doesn't have big pointy ears or a long snout-like nose or sharp gleaming teeth or... Great Huckleberry Finn! It was the big bad wolf! He was calling out, "Ham dogs! Who wants a ham dog? 3 for the price of 1! Ham dogs!" I quickly moved on. I came to Red Riding Hood's bread and honey stand. I bought a jar of honey and a loaf of bread and put them in the travel bag I was carrying for later. I'm just going to pause and say you may notice there's this kind of list mentality. I did this. I went here. I got this, this, and this. Makes for really monotonous writing. Just saying. Former child. By then, hunger was ravaging my stomach, so I desperately looked for another restaurant and found Fisherman and Wife's Cafe. Not like I could have eaten the bread and honey that I just... whatever. I went in and ordered the lively golden fish platter. When it came, I was half-starved. I was just about to dig in when I heard a voice. At first I thought I had died of hunger and was hearing angels, but it was only the fish on my plate. "Please, ma'am, please don't eat me. If you'll just take me to the sea and throw me in, I promise I'll grant you any wish. I could give you the world. Just don't eat me." I wished he would shut up. Boy, did he taste good. I paid the bill and left, leaving quite a handsome tip. Former child, what the frick is wrong with you? As I walked out, I realized I had just spent my last cent. I looked around, but it was dark and everything was closing up. I suddenly realized I was locked in. Great. I'd spent all my dough, was locked in, had no shelter, and it was just starting to rain. Hard. Right, because any adult who has limited cash and is stranded on a strange island would immediately go and spend it all at an amusement park and a restaurant. Right. Then from deep within my stomach I heard a little voice. "If you don't let me out, a disaster greater than this shall surely befall you." I was surprised to hear the voice that had formerly come from my plate, but ignored it all the same. What the frick? I couldn't find any shelter and was exhausted, so I sat down against an abandoned building. All of a sudden, a panel slid out from behind and I fell in. A crummy hand pulled me in and something hard hit my head. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but I awoke with a splitting headache. It was then I realized I couldn't move. I struggled, kicked, and bit at the ropes that held me, but to no avail. I looked up and was astonished. My captors were life-size gingerbread people. Men, women, and children all stared at me angrily as if I were the Cookie Monster. I introduced myself, but they remained silent. "What have I done to make you so mad at me?" I asked. A gingerbread man stepped forward. I guessed he was the leader by the red, white, and blue frosting suit and hat he wore. U.S.-centric, slightly? A little bit. "We are out for revenge," he retorted. "Do you know how many family members and friends we lose to human mouths every day? Why, right now we were just having a funeral for poor old Jerry. In this cookie jar we have all that remains of his crumbs." Then he looked at me snidely. "Maybe we could get you a glass of milk and you could finish him off." It seemed like a very good time to keep my mouth shut. The leader, Sam, said I would stand trial as many others had in the Supreme Cream Court. I was carried to their courtroom and placed in the defendant's seat. I noticed I had no lawyer. As the judge sat, I realized I was doomed. The jury, judge, and witnesses were all gingerbread people. The trial started as the bailiff told all to rise for the judge. The judge sat and told all to be seated. Then he said to me, "Now, Miss O'Connor," but I interrupted. I would like to say that at this point, in the first read-through, I had actually forgotten that this was a self-insertion story. Yes, I inserted myself in this story. I am the I. I am literally the I in this story. Then he said to me, "Now, Miss O'Connor," but I interrupted. "Your Honor, I'm sorry, but I couldn't help noticing that when those words came out of your mouth, you said my last name wrong. It's not O''Conner, but O''Connor. You see, it's very important to me to have my name said correctly, because my family has a history of always having our last names misspelled. My father even had his last name spelled incorrectly on his high school diploma and his first driver's license. There may be O'Connors in this world, just not in my family. That's what's important to me as I'm standing trial for my life." The judge leaned forward, narrowed his eyes, and spoke. "Oh, shut your cookie trap before I give you a verdict without a herring," as in the fish. "Excuse me for speaking up again, Your Honor, but don't you mean hearing, not herring?" The judge turned red in the face, which is not an easy thing for a gingerbread man to do. He screamed some words that I cannot write because, well, I'm a lady. After he had cooled down a bit, he leaned back and asked, "How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." "Ha! A likely story. Look, pal, there are more than 20 witnesses present who can testify that they saw you eat gingerbread people. Bailiff, call Mrs. O'Gramaham to the stand." The old gingerbread woman who took the stand wore a lovely green frosting gown and had an Irish accent. She testified that when very young she personally saw me buy 5 gingerbread people from a baker's shop and greedily stuff them into my mouth. At that point she broke down and cried. "Child, you got issues." One by one the witnesses were called to the stand. They each testified that at different times they had seen me eat gingerbread people. The verdict was harsh. I was to be fed to a pack of ravenous wolves in 1 week on the charge of the murder of over 50 gingerbread people. I was unbound and thrown in a dark dungeon. When my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw I was not alone. There were about 14 other human captives in prison with me. We were all to be fed to wolves, so we tried to come up with an escape plan. Then one came to me. In our jail, there was one window about 30 feet up which was unbarred. I guess our captors figured we were too short to get to the window, and we were, individually. We formed a human pyramid, and who was voted to be the top? Me. You were expecting Arnold Schwarzenegger? In parentheses. I pulled myself through the window and reached for the next 2 people. Unfortunately, my arms weren't long enough. The others all climbed down and encouraged me to go for help, which I did. By then it was the amusement park's opening time, and I could go tell the nearest policeman what was happening. Within 2 hours, the gingerbread people had been rounded up and were being held in a baker's shop. The human captives were freed, and each offered me their gratitude upon release. I was given a get-out-of-the-librarian's doghouse free card and a $10,000 cash reward for capturing the notorious Ginger Gang. I discovered they had been wanted for some time for feeding the citizens of Bookadise to wolves. I had money again, but this time I promised myself not to be reckless with it. Not like last time when my survival could have depended on those either $50 or $200 that I had. I looked around and realized how much I had come to love this place, even in the short time I had been here. My experience here has been miserable, and I somehow love this place. Ever since I had been little, I had inhaled books with a fervor that surprised all. I saw that everything here was part of a book, and that this was, without question or doubt, my dream world. This was where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. I bought a nice little cottage in fairy tale land and moved in. I became rich off the inventions I made. One I called the magic pencil. It would write whatever you wanted it to if you only spoke to it. For instance, if you said to it, "a big blue chair," then it would write "a big blue chair." I also came up with a cure for, get this now, Bookadise hatenuous, which is a hate for books. The cure was an antibiotic made from some of my words, the ones I'm speaking. The main words were love, adore, inhale, devour, and dictionary. Now, I'm going to pause and say this is where it would have ended. This is where the original story ended. But there was more. You see, I was taking this to the Mount Hermon Christian Writers Conference, and it was suggested to me that I should probably add a bit of a Christian message to the story. Therefore, without any sort of build-up or any transition, I immediately segue into this. Many months passed. Then one day I decided to go on a boat ride, for you see, it had been a year since I had first come to Bookadise, and I still hadn't explored the majority of the island. You wanna work out all the problems in that sentence for yourself? No? Okay. All right. Many months passed, but it has been a year. Come on, you gotta pick one. It's been a year, and I haven't explored this place I claim to love so much in the span of a day. I came to love this place so much, and I haven't explored it. And why do I need to go on a boat ride to explore this island? Wouldn't walking around do just as well, or maybe renting some kind of vehicle from Mr. Toad, or I don't know, something a little more inventive? Oh, right, now I know why. Ha! I needed a boat because I needed to segue into a Bible story. I figured I could take a day or two off from inventing and relax while exploring the unknown. I searched through all the towns I had grown accustomed to, for you see, I was now somewhat of a celebrity. Hailing from a far-off land and inventing terrific things can get you a high profile quick. Despite all this, I was unable to procure a boat, but succeeded in securing a small vessel from Huckleberry Finn's rentable rafts. The shop was located on the edge of a river for easy water access. I paddled out into the water and began my several-day vacation, heading toward the sea. I want to explore the island, but I'm heading out to sea. The island's that way. That way! As I floated away, I started musing. I had realized before I bought my little cottage that everything in this island was in some way, large or small, part of a famous book. No wonder it was uncharted. No one would ever want to leave such a place to tell everyone. Then everyone else would come and clutter up this beautiful island with modernistic junk. The last thing we need is Hansel and Gretel tearing around the island in an SUV. I had such a stunning grasp of reality at 12. Or maybe it was just hopeful. Probably hopeful. After about 3 hours, I reached the sea and drifted out into it. Several hours later, I could barely see the island. Why am I letting myself get so far away? Alone? Probably without a life vest? Suddenly, I saw a shadow under the water. A big shadow, the kind of shadow that if it belonged to what I thought it did, you would never want it as a house pet. The shadow disappeared, but I guessed it would return soon. I guessed right. I must know Murphy's Law. I heard a sound and turned around to see a huge gaping mouth filled with sharp cavity-filled teeth. Someone was missing his checkups. You're about to be eaten by a monster. Now's not the time to be commenting on dental hygiene. I screamed as his jaws closed around me. I was tumbled around and around as I clung to my raft for dear life. The washing machine-like pitching finally stopped. It was so dark I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I decided to take a deep breath to calm myself down. That was a big mistake. I smelled the most disgusting things you could ever imagine: moldy wood, decaying creatures, and dried-out seaweed. Pause for a second and say, please, don't do what I'm doing here. If you are watching this, you don't say, I smelled the most disgusting things you could ever imagine, and then list them one by one. You just say what you're smelling. Leave the audience to infer how disgusting it is by the strength of your description. Please. But on top of all these odors was the dominant smell of fish. It didn't take a marine biologist to figure out I had been swallowed by a whale. These odors somehow loosened my stomach muscles, spelled M-U-S-C-E-L-S. So these odors somehow loosened my stomach muscles and helped me share with the whale all I had to offer. After I finished retching, I sat back down on the raft to collect my thoughts and my stomach. I had no idea what to do, but I knew if I didn't find food and water soon, I would die. Then from inside of my stomach there came a voice which said simply, I told you so. I couldn't believe that pesky fish was still there. I slapped my belly to keep him quiet, but only succeeded in ricocheting my stomach off my spine. Ow! Putting aside the disturbing fact that there's still a living fish in my stomach, how did I not just vomit him out? Since I was getting hungry, I started feeling around for anything I might recognize as food. I will just hold my tongue about the fish that's already there in my stomach still for some ungodly reason. As I left, I wondered where I was going to get water. Much later, I found my way back to the raft with a pile of who knows what and started to eat it. Whatever it was tasted salty and felt slippery all the way down. Well, at least I tried to describe seaweed without saying it was seaweed. I gave it a try. By that time, I had grown used to the pungent smell of this cavernous place and was able to keep lunch down. Then, feeling extremely tired, I lay down on the raft and slept like one who had just swum the English Channel. I spent many hours in there. I would tell you how much time if I could, but not seeing any sunlight can hinder the counting of days. I slept and ate when the need arose. 1 hour there was a lot of motion. It felt like Michael Jordan was dribbling me. I'm looking at you, Dad. A sudden lurch, which might have been Jordan passing me off to Scottie Pippen, looking at you, Dad, threw me off the raft and into fish juice. I didn't stay there long. Before I knew it, I was propelled forward and up, out of the whale's stomach and onto a beach. I was blinded momentarily by what I thought was the sun. It turned out to be only the moon and stars, but even that was enough to make me squint, for I had been inside that whale for what seemed like years. When my eyes adjusted to this sudden change of light, I realized I was tired. So tired I could have slept on a bed of needles. Spotting a garden just a few yards off, 37.5 to be exact, but who's counting, in parentheses, and deciding that it looked like an inviting place to spend the night, I slowly dragged myself over. I noticed a rib restaurant just outside of the garden with a sign that read, Adams, but I figured I needed shelter more than food, so I kept crawling. I was abruptly driven back by an intense heat blast and a voice that sounded like thunder, which boomed, Come no further to the Garden of Eden. Stay away. I looked up and was stunned. I saw ... I saw ... I can't begin to describe what I saw, but I'm going to try anyway. I'm guessing what I witnessed was a cherub. His, her, do cherubim have genders? In parentheses. Robe was like light itself. Its eyes were like burning coals, and its well-muscled arms held a sword which burned with an unimaginable fury. The cherub flashed the sword back and forth, repeating its warning. I did the wise thing and backed off. I riveted my eyes on it and headed down the beach. So how am I watching where I'm going? Am I watching where I'm going? Pretty soon I came to a town and stopped. I was still tired, but this time I was going to find somewhere to sleep that wasn't off limits. I went to what looked like an inn and asked for a room. I was turned down, being told they were completely booked. They suggested the inn down the road, which I tried. They sent me to the next inn, which sent me to the next inn, which sent me to the next inn, which sent me to the next inn, until there were no more next inns. There were just mountains. I figured I'd still better stick close to the town, so I went back to the last inn and asked them if they could at least let me sleep in their barn. They told me that a couple had come through there already and taken that. I thought there must truly not be another place to stay if people were reduced to asking for barns to sleep in. I heard screams coming from the barn behind this last inn. I peeked inside to see if anyone needed help and saw a woman in labor. The weird thing was she looked like she was about 70 years old. I came in and asked if she wanted me to call an ambulance. She asked in a voice nearly wrecked from screaming, "What's an ambulance?" I was astonished at how primitive this place was. She asked me to please leave. She already had help. I think I'll have to come back to this note about the ambulance and things being primitive later. I was drop-dead tired by then, so I slept on the side of the street. When I awoke, I decided to explore the town I was in. I was famished, so I went deeper into the heart of the city and found a string of restaurants. There were also several concession stands selling various things. So there's concession stands and restaurants, but nobody knows what an ambulance is. I mean, we're primitive, but not that primitive. What level of primitive are we at? A sign on one of the carts says, "Mrs. Lott's Salted Pretzels. Enjoy the organic taste of on-the-run cooking." I entered a place called McExodus and looked up at the parchment board. I first glanced at all the drinks, which all looked inviting. I mean, who wouldn't want to try water turned to blood, gold dust water, bitter water, salt water, or Coca-Cola? I tried to decide between the following foods: manna pancakes, manna chip cookies, manna fried quail, quail McNuggets, and a manna sundae with manna-flavored syrup topped off with the world's largest piece of manna and more. What I wouldn't have given for a fillet of sea bass sandwich. Unfortunately, they were out of manna, but the manager said he was expecting a shipment any minute. But I was in a hurry, so I ordered Spam with a side of quail to go. I was too young for Monty Python. What is Spam doing here? When I got done with lunch, I asked someone where I was. Spending several days in a mammal and being spit up upon a foreign beach would be disorienting for anyone. He looked at me as if I were the dumbest person he had ever met and sneered, "Don't you know anything? This is the island of Bookadise. You're in Bible land." I sighed in relief. At least I was still in Bookadise. But I did wonder what would happen to me in this part of the island, where things that came out of a book were absolutely, positively 100% true. Or were they? I walked around the town for a few minutes to get my bearings. When I found nothing of interest, I decided to risk going up the mountain. I figured I ought to at least get some hiking equipment, so I went to Esau's Outdoor Gear and purchased some. It just seems like this entire story is like me going to different restaurants and retail locations so that I can title them after Bible characters and situations and fairy tale characters and situations and make a funny out of it. And it's not working and it's not interesting and there's no compelling plot and there's no compelling emotions in this entire thing at all. When I had gotten myself all ready, I started hiking toward the nearest mountain. I just wanted somewhere to eat my dinner in peace, watch the sunset, and sleep. The sign pointing in the direction I was headed stated Mount Horeb, and I, not remembering my Bible very well, followed the trail up the mountain thinking to enjoy some peace and quiet. Child. Not everybody was as completely obsessed with Bible trivia as you were at that age. Even people who read the Bible are not going to automatically know what Mount Horeb is. They might know Mount Sinai if you're lucky. Mount Horeb, they know what happened on it, but they don't know its name. Stop trying so hard. On my way up, I saw a nice little cave that looked like a good place to spend the night, whenever I was ready to call it a day. When I got to the top, I cooked up a nice quail burger with cheese as I watched the most brilliant sunset I had ever seen. I finished, and so did the sunset. There was just enough light to find the cave again and crawl in. I tried to locate its end, but there seemed to be none. Finally, I came to a wall and stopped. Taking out my lantern, I lit it. I could see I was at a dead end and that the cave split off in two directions. I saw a sort of glow coming from the right-hand fork, so against my better instincts, I went that way. If it's against your better instincts, why are you going that way? And why is a glow bad news? Usually you want to go toward the light. I came into a sort of open cave room, and in the middle of the room was a bush. Nothing spectacular about that except for the fact that it was on fire. On fire? But it wasn't burning up. Wasn't burning up? Suddenly I was very frightened. Very frightened? Is there an echo in here? In parentheses. I was about to make a dash for it when I heard a voice that seemed to come from within the bush. Moses. Moses, it said. Oh yeah, I'm going here. I looked at it nervously and replied, Mr. Bush, sir, I'm not Moses. I think you've got the wrong person. I know, it said, but I've always wanted to say that. Never mind. We have business to discuss. My employees have been taken hostage and are being worked to death by a company that calls itself the Egyptians. Their boss is a man named Pharaoh. Personally, I don't trust a man named Faye, but I need you to go to him and tell him to let my employees go. Who do you think did that part? It wasn't the 12-year-old. I recalled this story from the Bible and realized that something was wrong, that something had been wrong ever since I set foot in this place. Everything I had seen had been somewhat altered from the truth of the Bible. I glanced around as the bush rambled on and saw an especially large boulder that looked out of place. Acting on a hunch, I peeked around it and saw a man hunched over some controls that were built into the back of the rock. He was speaking into a microphone the same words that were coming out of the bush. Now, I'm no rocket archaeologist, but I knew something was amiss. I yelled, "Hey, what are you doing? Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. Stop that this instant." The poor man jumped out of his skin. He grabbed it, and after crawling back in, he stammered and giving excuses. Let me say that again. He's stammering and giving excuses. Yes. I screamed at him. "What are you doing, you fraud, cheapening God's word like this? What would God say if he came in and saw you doing this? How many people have you deceived? If I were violent, I would punch you inside out, but I'm a pacifist, so I'll just make you feel guilty. You're a very bad man." "No, my dear, I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad deity," he said meekly. "Years ago, I ran away from home, chased off by problems I couldn't face. I chanced upon this little island and built a home here. I challenged God that if he was real, he would show himself to me. He didn't appear, so I decided to make him real and alive by creating Bookadise. I concluded some of the island would be dedicated to the classics, well-read novels, fairy tales, and the like, and the other part would be devoted to God's word, so I could force him to show his face, to make the folks that came here think this was really the Bible come to life. I wanted them to be awed over the birth of baby Jesus, so I find any woman who's pregnant and pay her to give birth in the park." I don't have words for you, past child. I wanted them to experience what the Israelites had to eat for 40 years, and to see what it was that Moses saw and followed in order to free them. The truth is, the bush is real, but the fire is a hologram. I even wired the bush with a microphone to make it seem like it was talking. I just wanted God to come alive, and he still hasn't shown his face in all the 40 years I've been here. 40 years? 40 years? I am beginning to think he must not be real after all. At this point he broke down and started to cry. I felt a little guilty for screaming at him, but I knew how I could help. I said gently, "Your heart is in the right place, but your thinking isn't. God doesn't live in books or amusement parks or in anything that man can think of. He can be found inside your heart. You have looked every place except where he really is. In trying to find him and make him real, you've cheapened his very word. You've taken God's deeply profound message and reduced it to nothing more than Disneyland's great moments with Mr. Lincoln. Do you still want to find God?" "Yes, yes, 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 yes!" "Please help me find him. I've been trying for years. Help me find him." "Then close your eyes and just talk to him as if he were here, because he is." "But how should I address the creator of the universe?" "Just talk to him like you're talking to a best friend, because he will be if you ask him." I would tell you what followed, but it was a very private moment. Suffice to say, when he stopped, he looked up with a peace and joy on his face that passed understanding. From this I could tell God was now in his heart. "Well," he said, "I don't know what to do next. Do you have any suggestions? Do you think I should tear down Bookadise? Because I, in all my 12-year-old wisdom, know exactly what this guy should do with his property." "No," I said, "but maybe you should correct some of the things in Bible land that aren't in the Bible, and let people know this is just a town modeled after the Bible. Don't let them think it's real, because all that's very realistic." "One thing is wrong, though. You probably shouldn't pay pregnant women. You might want to just use one woman and pay her to act as if she were in labor. You see, when I dropped by the barn, the woman who was there looked like she was in her 70s. Mary was a lot younger, and you should probably take down the ... And so we talked for a while about the things that might need changes. He decided to spend the rest of his life working on Bible land and aligning it with Scripture as much as he could. This was the reason he left Fairy Tale Land to me. He told me there were other parts of Bookadise. Are you ready for my original naming? Classic Land, Fiction Land, and Fable Land. But I knew I would not be able to explore them just yet. It was going to be a full-time job governing Fairy Tale Land. But who knows? Maybe for my next vacation. The moral of the story. He who goes to extremes to find God is wasting his time. God can be found anywhere, anytime, if your heart is like an open book. Where do I even start? I mean, I'm sure you could see a bunch of stuff as I was going along, but my story is the epitome of telling you what is going on without showing you. I have not compelled you emotionally at all. I haven't even compelled me emotionally at all, and I wrote the dang thing. There really isn't a plot. There's just me wandering around a place that I would love to have wandered around as a kid and getting in trouble, and making as many references as I could possibly cram in. There's no sense of actual passage of time. I just tell you that time is passing and expect you to believe it. The logic is horrendous. There's holes everywhere and inconsistencies every time you turn your head. And yes, I am a Christian, but that entire second half was shoehorned in so hard, and the moral was shoehorned in even harder. Really, I should have just left the first half as it was if I was going to take it in at all. The style has no variation at all. It's a monotonous list of I did this and I went here and I bought this, this, and this. This story was built around however many references I could make to various other stories. That does not a compelling plot make. And in all this, I never answered the question, what happens to that stupid fish? Do I go through the rest of my life with it? I mean, what the heck, child? Why? So that was The Island of Bookadise, a Christian fable for children of all ages by Dusty Rose O'Connor at about age 12 or 13. And yes, I did take this to the Mount Hermon Christian Writers Conference, and yes, I had it professionally critiqued. And I do believe, I skimmed through the comments on some of my old manuscripts, and they were very gracious. They must have known how old I was, and looking at the writing, they were basically telling me I had a good imagination and that it wasn't appropriate for their particular publishing house. They are absolutely correct. It is not appropriate for any particular publishing house. It was a bad piece of writing. But they encouraged me to keep trying, and I did. And actually, that is really why I read this to you. Because as funny as it is to laugh at 12 and 13-year-old child's horrendous writing, some of you really like the writing I've done under the pen name He Calls Me His Child. And if you despair of your writing and you hold my writing to some esteem, I just really want you to know that I walked a path to get better. And I still have a lot of weaknesses in my writing, and I could point them out to you. And actually, I want to do this with some of my older fan fictions too, by the way. I want to read them to you and pick apart some of the stuff that's wrong with them. I haven't read them in ages, so this is the perfect time to do it. But I just wanted to give you some hope, I guess, that if I can improve from that to the writing that you've read and enjoyed, then you can also improve. Improvement is possible, even if your writing starts out like this. And no matter what age in life you are, it can get better if you read a lot and practice a lot, and just keep practicing. I'm Child, and this has been The Island of Bookadise, and I can't wait to get my hands on my next piece of old writing.